So welcome everyone. My name is Jeff Hunt. I'm one of the team members here at Connecting Genetics to Climate. Thank you for joining us today for our event as part of Harvard Climate Action Week, Biotechnology with Climate Applications. I'm going to talk about them at Harvard and beyond. As you just noted, this will be recorded, at least the main discussion session. We are going to sort of have two parts to our event today, as part of Harvard Climate Action Week. The first, we're going to hear from a number of experts in the field of climate biotechnology, who are going to share from different perspectives, and we're going to have some panel discussion with them, and then we're going to have breakout rooms, and so that's going to be a chance for all of you to actually have one-on-one interactions with these folks. We will have multiple breakout rooms, and we'll talk about how that will work in a second. So just to sort of prep everyone in terms of an agenda. Before we get started, or as we're going here, we welcome you all to introduce yourselves in the chat, saying where you're based, and you can also add sort of what your interest is in climate biotechnology. So with that, I'm going to introduce our co-organizers for this event, from the Harvard Alumni for the Climate and Environment Group. And I believe, Michelle, you will be speaking on behalf. So Michelle, take it away.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today for this event. Super excited. Thank you so much for inviting us to co-host. My name is Michelle Faggart. I'm one of the co-presidents of Harvard Alumni for Climate and the Environment, or HACE. We are a SIG of the Harvard Alumni Association, and we have about 4,000 members kind of globally who are passionate about making a difference in the climate and sustainability space. If you are not a member yet, we would love for you to join us, no matter what your interest is in climate or sustainability. If you are a seasoned expert just kind of getting started and don't know what to do, we welcome you to join us. We have the space for you. We have an amazing, robust programming committee that plans everything from monthly book club to lecture series. And we are moving kind of from this global model to more local in-person events. So again, there's something for you. We're going to share a few opportunities in the chat for you to become a member, to check on our website, to join our mailing list. Thank you, Eleanor, for doing that. And I will turn it back over. And once again, thank you, and excited to be here today.
Great. Thank you, Michelle, and Eleanor, for joining us. And as she mentioned, you don't have to necessarily be an alumni of Harvard to join HACE, so any sort of Harvard affiliation is good there. So I'm now going to turn it over to an actual alum of Harvard who does also have currently an association with Harvard, Morgan Thompson, who's my teammate here on Connecting Genetics to Climate, and she's going to give an overview of sort of what the discussion is going to be about today on climate biotechnologies. So Morgan.
So yeah, welcome from me, everyone. We're really glad to have a crowd here today, and we really love the mix of folks we have, which we'll say a little bit more about. Connecting Genetics to Climate is a relatively new initiative. We're based out of Dr. Ting-Wu's lab in the Department of Genetics at Harvard Medical School. And our role in all of this is really to facilitate informed dialogue about these technologies and across sectors and communities. And we're hoping for a future in which the world addresses climate change with all effective tools. So there's a lot to grapple with. Is biotech, and where can biotech have a role to play? And we want to be having those conversations, asking questions, and helping people know about these technologies so that they can make choices. What are we talking about here? So I'm going to start with a few examples, and you're going to hear like a whole bunch more examples, which is one of the amazing things about the panelists and speakers we have today. But the types of technologies we're talking about are things like drought-resistant crops, which have actually been in widespread use and on US farms for more than a decade. And here there was a gene that was introduced from a different species into corn. And so that's one example, right? There's a lot of agricultural, agri-tech examples. And we can help with heat resistance, drought resistance, and other types of pest and disease in agricultural crops. Another example that's more just emerging is planting trees that are engineered to grow faster. This modification doesn't fall under the government genetically modified organism regulations because it was created by random mutation. So the type of genetic mutation matters. And so starting to seed ideas for how do we question these technologies, and part of it is how they're made, what type of genetic modification is happening. And then much earlier stage, folks are looking at things like engineering microbes and changing the cow microbiome or other livestock to reduce methane emissions. So that's mostly from cow burps, not farts, but burps. And that is a target and an area of research. And these technologies range from adding things to food all the way to developing vaccines to prevent methane emissions of livestock. So we have about half of the folks here that have some idea of at least one example of these technologies or are working in the field, and half of the folks here that haven't heard of these technologies at all and or couldn't name an example but have heard that there might be some connection, right? So I will say a PhD in genetics, technically from Harvard Medical School, was in that category of the people who had kind of heard vaguely that biotech might have something to do with climate, might have some applications, but I really didn't know the breadth of what is available at this time. So just to make that clear for folks that, this really is a gap in what is being discussed widely and publicly. And that's something that we've heard from a whole landscape analysis that we've done over the last couple of years. Most people haven't heard about climate biotech. There aren't accessible lists of the full range of climate biotech. So there's announcements of this company is producing this product, but we really don't have a lot of places to go where the whole picture is captured for folks. We've heard from policymakers that they want ideas for how to, question these technologies and make decisions about these technologies while there are still a lot of unknowns. And that is the state we are still in. For many of these technologies, there are still a number of unknowns. And then there's a lot of silos and pressures that prevent more communication about climate biotech within the tech developers, as well as outside of the folks that are developing these technologies. So we're talking about, in this space, not health and humans. We are talking about non-human organisms. They have some genetic alteration. It may or may not qualify as a genetic modification through our US legal regulatory system. They can be used for either monitoring and sensing, mitigation, or adaptation of climate impacts. And they usually have other outcomes. So there might be higher crop yields or some other benefit in addition to whatever the climate impact might be. And then they have the potential to have environmental scale impact. So some of these are talking about, gigaton scale of carbon removal or other types of environmental scale impacts. And the things we want to learn about and weigh up in this really wide range of technologies. So the type of organism varies. Everything from microbes, bacteria, and fungi, all the way to livestock, as we've talked about, all sorts of plants. So that's variable. How the technology is designed for environmental release or a totally contained strategy, a totally manufacturing process strategy, that differs a lot. Whether there's a place-based target or a geosystem target, is it land? Is it the ocean? Is it a specific geographical region? The stage of development varies widely. We have the drought-resistant crops that have been around, and we have really emergent things like cyanobacteria that might be used to enhance rock weathering. Who is developing the technologies varies a lot. So there's a lot of development in the academic arena. There's also startups, mid-scale and large-scale corporations that are working on these technologies. And then are there alternatives, right? Are there other types of technologies that could also contribute to the same problem? And how do we weigh up biotechnologies in comparison to those other approaches? And so one of the things that we're trying to do today, we want to leave you all with excitement about talking about a few examples of these technologies and also what questions you have and what questions you can ask of others. So it's really sparking curiosity, and it's really getting into the weeds of some of the specifics. What is the type of genetic modification? Who's developing it? How is it being developed and deployed? When will it be available? How do we think it scales? And what are the time frames for those things to scale? So one of the things that we've developed is a questioning tool, and we'll be putting a link to that in the chat and sharing more. And that can be a guide for you all as well as we go into breakout groups and you're asking questions of some of the experts that we have here today. We also have experts in the audience, so I just want to name that and just make sure that folks realize that there's like a really wide range of folks here, and that's really what we wanted, so that there's lots of voices that can contribute to the conversation, whether you're in the know or whether this is totally new. So I'll turn it back to Jeff.
Thanks, Morgan. Before we jump into our guests, as Morgan mentioned, we have a questioning tool, and really a lot of our interest in this work is creating dialogue and sort of not just hearing from those who are on sort of the technology expert side, but hearing from everyone. And so we are going to share a quick poll with you all to get your input on sort of where you're coming from and sort of how you're thinking about these issues, either given your background or given what you've just heard. So Leonard, but I'm just going to give sort of a brief recap of sort of the responses that we got. So sort of what excites people, from our word cloud, things like hope, innovation, sustainability, resilience are all things that are really coming through. For sort of what gives us pause, politics is sort of the biggest word that's coming up: regulation, biosafety, cost, and unintended consequences come up. And then the list of questions was really great as well. And Leonor's going to share all of this out in the chat. But a lot of these questions are things that we've heard from people before, and some are new. So it's really great to see sort of the range of things there. So keep that in mind as we're hearing from our panelists, because those are the questions that we're going to want to have you discuss with them. So each of them is going to give sort of a brief, like 3-minute overview of a specific area. We'll have a little panel discussion, and then we'll switch over to breakout rooms. So we're going to start off with Jake Wintermute. So Jake, take it away.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. So my name's Jake. I formerly worked for a biotech company called Ginkgo Bioworks. I'm Harvard PhD, 2011, now working in the ag tech space. So I'm a technology guy. I'm a scientist by training, and my interest in climate biotechnologies is the kind of underlying or enabling layers that are going to allow lots of people, lots of different companies to be able to build impactful biotechnologies that then go on to benefit the planet and make a lot of money. So there's a couple of big trends that are on my mind that are things that you've probably heard about. So you may have heard of the falling cost of DNA sequencing. The cost to sequence a human genome dropped from $2 billion or something in the original Human Genome Project. Over the course of 25 years, we got it down to under 1,000. So there's this exponential decrease in the cost of DNA sequencing. There's a similar exponential decrease in the cost of DNA synthesis. If you want to buy a piece of DNA from a DNA synthesis company, you can buy a gene for about $100 now. There is, of course, an AI story. There's enabling technologies like AlphaFold. The Nobel Prize went to David Baker a couple of years ago for enabling technologies that allow us to use AI to design proteins, for example. And we can do a lot now with AI to modify DNA sequences or to identify useful functional sequences in genomes. And so what's coming together is this kind of enabling layer where it's getting faster and it's getting cheaper to build with biotechnology. And so what that means is that we can be a lot more creative and a lot more agile in terms of the problems that we solve with biotechnology. So we're all used to thinking about the pharma space where biology is really, really hard problems that are really expensive, take a long, these sort of cure for cancer scale problems. And that's what biologists are used to working on. But we're getting into a place where, maybe you can come up with a bioproduct for maybe it's a few $1 million, not a few billion. And hopefully in the near future, maybe we can get that down to $10,000, right? Or these kind of software scale costs where you can imagine a much larger ecosystem building a lot more bioproducts. And so that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in how do we enable that ecosystem? The conversations that I want to have today are what should that ecosystem build? So if we get to a place where you could build anything that you can imagine in biology, it's Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, except for biology. What do we want? What do we want in a world like that? What is going to be good for humans? What is going to be good for the planet? What is the low-hanging fruit for in terms of climate mitigation? And how do we get the kind of trust layer that the technologies that we build in this space are going to be things that are actually beneficial to the world? And so I am excited to be having those conversations today.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake. That's a great way for us to start our framing. So we are going to switch over to Emily.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Stoller. I'm at the Wyss Institute, which is a translational institute at Harvard University. So we take technologies out of the labs and develop them into startups and licensing for larger companies. And in particular, I'm leading our Sustainable Futures Initiative. And my background is actually chemistry and materials. And I joke that I'm trying to put myself out of a job because I was trained in natural product synthesis. And so I did a lot of multi-step synthesis where I was creating an enormous amount of waste and chlorinated solvents and metals and all kinds of things. And then it is the Willy Wonka chocolate factory menu of things because I joined Zymergen, which was another biomanufacturing company, and was like, organisms can make this in water at low temperature? Are you serious? And so, while it's not all there yet, it is pretty amazing and kind of knocks my socks off. So I've decided to sort of spend a lot of the rest of my career life doing this and trying to make this a reality. And so at the Wyss Institute right now, some of the projects that we're thinking about, some of the things that we're thinking about are really practical around how to make it work, how to make it scale, how to make it inexpensive. We've done a bunch of techno-economic analyses and said, all right, these are the pinch points. Can we address these? And so I'm really driven to see this get into industry in a way that really takes hold.
Awesome. And Emily will have lots of examples to share in her breakout room. So if you want to hear what's going on at the Wyss, go with her. So next up we have Shara.
Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm Shara Ticku. I am one of the co-founders and the CEO of a company called C16 Biosciences. We started the company in 2018, and it all got started close by, technically at the MIT Media Lab, though I was grabbing my MBA from Harvard. My co-founder, Harry, was getting his PhD at Harvard, and David, our third co-founder, was MIT. We met in a class at the MIT Media Lab and got excited about, I would say, basically a problem and a solution. We got excited about a problem, which was the massive destruction being caused by the production of palm oil, and which I'll talk about in a second. And we got excited about a solution which was synthetic biology, because we met in the fall of 2016, actually September of 2016, which was when the very first Impossible Burger launched at Momofuku in New York. And we thought it was the coolest thing in the world that a burger made with microbiology was launching at a Michelin star restaurant, branded. And we got very excited about the technology. And so we started playing around in the class, and basically we saw what had happened with Impossible Foods. And we had also seen, both Harry and myself had seen what was happening with palm oil. Palm oil is a vegetable oil. It is the most popular vegetable oil in the world, and it is found in 50% of products on supermarket shelves. It's actually great as a functional ingredient. It's found in foods. It's found in laundry detergents. It's the basis of surfactants. It helps mascara retain its color. It's really, really good at a lot of things. What it is bad at is simply the way that it's made. And the tree can only grow within about 5 to 10 degrees of the equator. And as we want more and more and more palm oil, that leads to slashing and burning of tropical rainforest at that point around the equator. Palm oil alone emits almost 2% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which is more than the entire global aviation sector. So it's actually massive from a greenhouse gas perspective, but also land use, biodiversity, human health and well-being, etc. So we said, what would it take to do what Impossible Foods has done for meat, for proteins, for beef? What would it take to do that for something like palm oil? First principles, like what has to be true? You need to find an organism that can make triglycerides, which is more complex than proteins. You need to get large scale, so you need a very robust organism, et cetera, et cetera. We started playing around. We had $1,000 from MIT at the time, and we started building the company while we were in grad school. We're 7 years in now. The technology is mostly de-risked. We're producing at commercial scale. We're actively selling under the brand name Palmless, which we sell B2B in the beauty and personal care industry. And we're looking to move into bigger and more markets. So we've received funding from the Department of Defense to look at food security as national security and scaling biomanufacturing. We're looking to move into home care and food markets, like I mentioned. So it's a really fun part of time in the company where we've actually solved the technical risk around our first product. We're now getting to look at doing more products and really focused on how do we scale the technology, how do we commercialize it, and how do we build a business that can make money and be funded and have impact on a massive scale. Thank you.
All great questions, which I think we're all asking ourselves. All right, and our final speaker will be Garrett.
Hey, everyone. My name is Garrett Dunlap. And I guess first to say thanks to Connecting Genetics to Climate and HACE for bringing this event together today. I'm really glad to be a part of the conversation. I am a PhD graduate from Harvard. I got my PhD in 2022 in the Biological and Biomedical Sciences program. Now I live and work in spaces at the intersection of science and policy. Currently, I work for a nonprofit organization called EBRC, the Engineering Biology Research Consortium. We're parts member society and parts think tank. We have upwards of 300 members from over 100 institutions, both across the US and internationally. Really representing kind of a wide breadth of biotechnology research and application. And really EBRC as an organization works to advance the research that's being done in labs and in companies and ensuring that it can address and meet both national needs and global needs. We do that through a number of ways. We do efforts called roadmaps, and you could find them at roadmap.ebrc.org. One of our most recent ones, specifically on this topic of applications for climate and sustainability, highly recommend checking it out and seeing the current challenges and bottlenecks across the number of applications in the field. We also do a lot of work around bioliteracy building, efforts around biosecurity and ensuring that biotechnology is done responsibly and innovation comes responsibly, and efforts around policy, which is what I lead. it's probably not news to you that we find ourselves in a tricky political climate here. And of course, the context of climate is along the ride with that here in the US. And for some, it sparks urgency and action, and for others, it's much more polarizing. But really, I think the opportunity right now and really what cuts across the political spectrum, and I think has even been mentioned by a couple of my fellow panelists, are ideas like resilience and security and national security and economic opportunity. And I think that's really where biotechnology has a critical role to play. As the other panelists have mentioned, and Morgan, we have amazing innovations like drought-resistant crops and microbes that can mine critical minerals from rock and other things. But really, to state perhaps the obvious, none of them can succeed on science alone, and really, the fact that they live and die on policy, ensuring that regulation can keep pace and ensure that Congress can stay interested for more than one election cycle, and ensuring that the public buys into the story. I'll stop there. I'll say, there's really a lot of activity and movement, both in the US, but also internationally, and really happy to talk more about this.
All right, thanks, Garrett. So I'm going to bring everybody on. So we're going to have a short sort of panel discussion where I'm going to throw some questions out, but really interested in having our experts sort of talk amongst themselves to sort of prime the pump for our breakout sessions. So you all have sort of alluded to this, but when we're thinking about sort of climate broadly, why biotechnology, or why not?
I'll start. I'll start with a very specific reason, which is when we talk about climate, greenhouse gas emissions is what comes to mind. And I think that's very important. What we're working on C16 has impact, and probably some others can speak to that. But actually, I want to talk about land use as a climate issue. When we think about a lot of our supply chains today and things that are made, especially in spaces like food and agriculture, those are heavy land users. And when we think about land, not all land is equal. There is sort of high carbon stock land like tropical forest, then there's arable land, and then there's non-arable land. And for the past however many century and a half or so, agriculture has been the main driver of innovation, and that has been fairly extractive in terms of land use, and it has been very horizontal. And I am actually of the opinion that we are running out of land in order to make things that we need to make, especially as we look at things like population growth into the next 2.5 decades. What's very cool about biology is that you can grow things vertically instead of horizontally. And some of the work that we're working on, you can make food without land. And so typical biology, typical microbiology, as we're working on with fermentation, you would take a sugar source, so glucose or sucrose, and feed it to a microorganism. So let me take a step back. Palm oil, you burn rainforest, you convert that land into monoculture agriculture, and you produce a vegetable oil. The next generation, which is what we're scaling today, is you can grow in fermentation tanks, which don't need to be on arable land. They definitely don't need to be slashing and burning forest. They can be on non-arable land. But we do use a feedstock like sugar, which does need land, but it's much better. We've shown that we can be 300x more land efficient than palm oil, and up to sort of 75 to 90% better on the greenhouse gas footprint. In the future, there's work being done where you don't even need sugar. So could you take carbon dioxide, capture it, convert it into a feedstock like acetate, and then produce palm oil? That actually sounded impossible to my team. We've been funded by the Gates Foundation to do this work, and it's working. And so that's one really specific example on climate, which is like biology is actually just, microbiology is just better than plant biology in this case. From a climate perspective, hands down, the case is very, very clear.
I like that answer. I'm gonna jump in with a less less data-driven answer. I want to start with a more vibes-driven answer. Like, maybe I'm biased as a biologist, but like, carbon is our thing. Carbon is our thing. We're carbon-based life forms. Biology owns carbon. Biology eats carbon for breakfast, right? Like the carbon cycle, that's biology. That's just carbon being passed back and forth between different biological things that are using it, right? So like I don't really remember when I first learned that like, oh, biology could be a good technology for carbon and climate, because like it was my earliest days as a biologist. I kind of assumed that biology was going to be the answer. Now, okay, but less vibes driven, more data driven. The reality is, like, if you do look at where like the sources of greenhouse gas emissions, a lot of it is not really very biological stuff, right? Like 75% of it is energy, and it's going to be things like wind and solar that solve those kind of problems. So that there is a lot of the CO2 that is not going to be handled by biology. The rest of it, the like 25% of it that remains, is interesting sectors. It's sometimes called like hard to abate or hard to mitigate sectors, because it's not like you're not just burning the CO2, like you're actually using it for stuff. You're actually using it to make, petroleum products, or to do agriculture, or to make cement. There's actual like physical things being made, and so you can't just like build more solar panels and solve those kind of problems. And so the quarter of the pie that biology plays in is like lots of little things, right? There's not going to be like one home, like it's not going to be like somebody invents the super algae that like takes over the ocean and sponges up all of the carbon in the world. Although, I don't know, maybe we should do that. Probably we shouldn't, but it's going to be, it's going to be 1,000 little products. It's going to be and so this also is inspiring to me as a biologist, because there is this kind of like unity and in diversity. So I like it when biology is doing lots of different things. That's kind of inspiring to me, and the idea that biology can be a kind of a unified thing that makes the clothes on your back, and the the wood in your chair, and the cement in your house, and the fragrances that you wear, and the like emulsifiers that are in your dessert products. That's beautiful to me as a biologist, because there's a kind of a resonance between all the diversity of the products that we use, and the diversity of the living world. And so that's my answer for why biology is gonna be the right way to solve these kind of product focused physical layer problems in carbon.
Yeah, I think I'd like to follow up on vibing a little bit around it, because, and you can't own carbon, because we think a lot about carbon too, but as chemists. But honestly, like, one of the things that really struck me from the very beginning was that with chemistry, we're always pushing so hard to make things happen. We're pushing so hard to break a bond and make it form and do these things, and it's always pretty nasty. And then you get involved in some of the biological projects, and oh, I love that series of books. Somebody just put the monk in a robot. Those are great. But you take biology, and there's this sense of wanting to figure out what direction the organism's going to go in a little bit. You're kind of coaxing and looking and watching. And yes, you do some engineering, but there's something very natural to me about, or very harmonious to me about being able to use biology to solve some of these problems and to create our materials.
And I guess just to add, and it's probably nothing much new, but really love how biology has a tendency to be able to solve multiple challenges at once. And maybe an example I'll throw out, there's a company, if you haven't looked into the economic impacts of the dye industry, I recommend you look at them, both in terms of the amount of water that's used, and also just the chemical pollution in that, and particularly obviously in regions in the global south. The company to highlight in this, a UK company called Colorifics, really have done amazing work in engineering microbes to be able to produce and fix naturally occurring dyes onto fabric, and doing so with an insanely less amount of water, and like no toxic dye runoff, and less energy, et cetera, et cetera. And they're already partnering with like fashion brands and global brands. And I think this is kind of the broader point, that biology doesn't just like patch over climate problems, but it really is like rewiring the whole underlying process. And that's what I just find so compelling about it.
So we've talked initially about scientific challenges, approaches. I'm curious from each of your perspectives on the meta issues that either help or hinder this work. I'm thinking about politically, economically, socially. What is pushing us forward to help these technologies come to the forefront? What is a challenge? What are barriers that are needed to be either addressed, not necessarily overcome? What should we be aware of outside of the realm of sort of our scientific perspective?
I mean, I think we can start with something like the resistance to GMOs in general, and sort of lot of ideas around those that some are true and some are just from really bad examples in the early days of messing things up. And so I feel like there's a public perception problem.
It's totally agreed. The perception problem, and I guess taking it beyond just like the random member of public, but also taking it to the halls of government, and really needing to ensure that there is, I guess, one, an awareness of the breadth of biotechnology. And then I think maybe it was either Jeff or Morgan that mentioned it's not just healthcare applications. I think that's something that I'm continuously fighting an uphill battle with in my conversations with governments, and that is like it is this broad base of applications. So really, to some extent, like building awareness of the breadth of applications and the broad-based applications. But really, I think also ensuring that you can personalize it in some way to the person or the constituency or the region, and really thinking about how biotech in the middle of Illinois, where I am right now, might be totally different and totally different impacts than in Boston or in other regions, and really thinking about how to make that message clear.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll sort of take a more provocative position. I'll say maybe one of the problems that we have is we're pretty cautious, and we tend to be a pretty slow moving culture in the biotech world. And that's good in a lot of ways. You want the people who make your foods and your medicines to be cautious and slow moving, but I think it also makes it a little bit difficult for us to change our messages or to change our strategy in the way that we communicate our technology in the face of sort of changing political headwinds. I think so. For example, certainly we do have a public perception problem. The idea that we have a public perception problem dates to the kind of 1970s and the original public resistance to GMOs. And like, although it's very real, I worry that many of us have kind of settled into that pattern and kind of assumed that this public perception problem that we have, that people don't trust us around GMOs, is this kind of implacable law of nature that is always going to be part of the cultural landscape. And that's really not necessarily true, right? Like there's most people don't have any kind of strong opinion about the role of GMOs or the safety of biotechnologies, or whether what biotech can do is going to be net good for the world or net negative. And I think there's a lot of chance to move people's perceptions, particularly once we can start to offer them like, this is a thing, right? Like this is a thing. What do you think about this, right? Like this is not a hypothetical, right? Like here's toothpaste, right? And it is made with biotechnology. And that's the kind of thing there's every reason to believe that it's going to move a lot of people's opinions. And so like that's kind of on us as a culture to be willing to adapt and respond and to change the way that we speak about technologies, and not just kind of assume that we need to be in a defensive crouch against a skeptical public.
And some of that transition that Jake, you're speaking to, has happened in the context of pharma products, right? A lot of our medicines are now produced by biotechnology. And so there's areas in which we feel more comfortable. And in the non-human organism area and the environmental scale change area, we perhaps rightly feel some level of caution of how everyone has bad examples of how things have been introduced into the world, right? And we have some different sets of questions about how these technologies work in these other applications. And so it's like this interesting mix of all of it, and a conversation around what is nature, what is natural, and what do we do if we're acknowledging a human responsibility at this moment in time, that we are responsible for climate change as humans. How do we intentionally change things in ways that restore what can be restored and create a new system? But that's a lot of intentional choices with a lot of unknowns and a lot of complexity. And so this is where our mission around dialogue is really to like, let's surface it all and like really get into the weeds.
I do have something additional, which is funding and business models. So funding is the first one. Different from therapeutics, a lot of the companies in biotechnology working on climate problems, well, that's a business model point, but funding is the first one, which is many of the companies to date have had to raise over $1 billion in private markets to even get to relevancy. And that is a lot of money, and it is a lot of money to try to be raising from venture capital, and it doesn't work. And if we look at other climate technologies, in particular solar and wind, and even things happening now like carbon capture, we've seen so much more government support for advancing these technologies in different functions and formats, in grants, in subsidies, in loans, in loan guarantees. And we just have not seen it for the sort of non-therapeutics biotech. And we haven't seen it in the US, we haven't seen it in Europe, we haven't seen it in Asia, we haven't seen it anywhere. So government support, specifically through funding to help advance these, is one. And I actually think there's a massive opportunity for alignment there. The second is business models. And again, comparing to sort of therapeutics biotech, there is a much stronger infrastructure in this space for acquisitions and IP licensing, which can help companies get to scale without having to raise billions of dollars. So partly that's different because in that space, you're often creating novel active molecules, which are clearly patentable through composition of matter. And there's a clear infrastructure for large pharma to be able to license those from biotechnology companies. In this space, a lot of the innovators working on solutions are actually trying to replace things which already exist in nature. And as we know, you can't patent something that already exists in nature. So I think the patentability landscape is more challenging, and that has created less robust infrastructure for things like licensing as a business model, which means that innovators have to do a lot more, doing a lot more, costs a lot more money, and that's really hard, especially when you're only relying on venture capital as a funding source.
Spoken like a business major. I love it. I think we could keep going this discussion, but I'm really interested to give all of you an opportunity to get into breakout rooms with all of our panelists. And those discussions can be however you want to have them. So what we're going to do is we're going to have 4 separate breakout rooms, one with each of our panelists here. We're going to have about 20 minutes in each one, and then we're going to have a chance for you to switch to someone else. We're going to try to keep them as balanced as possible. So, I mean, we don't want 30 people in one room and 2 people in another room. So we'll just keep that in mind when you're choosing and seeing where folks are going, that you'll have a chance to talk to these folks one-on-one at a second opportunity. And we will also be sharing out contact information so you can follow up directly if you want more in-depth information. So Leonore is going to open up the breakout rooms. Feel free to choose yourself. We're not going to assign these, except for our panel members. We're going to assign you to your specific rooms. We'll start the clock. We'll chime in with about a 5-minute warning and about a 2-minute warning, and then we'll switch again. I think we're going to start just to hear a little bit about what was discussed in each room, and then we'll sort of open it up. But I'm just going to ask each of our sort of panelists to just give us an overview from their 2 discussions. So Garrett, do you want to share what was discussed in your group?
Sure. I guess maybe to share kind of a key theme that came up was really around the public trust and public engagement aspects. And I think each of the 2 sessions, that was kind of a key focus of conversation, but maybe coming at it a little bit differently. Including like community involvement and engagement in the process, or working to ensure that scientists aren't just communicating to scientists in ways that only scientists understand, and things like that, of really thinking of how we can effectively work to change some of those structures of scientists and researchers engaging with the public earlier on and throughout the whole process, and more effectively altogether.
Great. Sure.
We talked about a wide breadth of topics, but overall it's sort of thinking about the like technology to commercialization pipeline. So what's been the hardest part of that timeline, and what are the sort of major challenges, and how do you get through those? Setting go no-goes. How long do you give yourself to work on technology targets within a company when you have pressure? Go to market and picking markets. How do you think about which markets to prioritize, especially if you're a bunch of scientists and you aren't used to thinking about markets? And a little bit on this concept of like, what are the other business models, and how can we encourage more collaboration? What would that look like? Those were a couple of the topics that we covered. So it was fun.
Awesome. Emily, sorry, mixed up in the Brady Bunch thing here.
This was a lot of fun. So of course we, echoing what everyone else is talking about in terms of, yes, we covered the idea of public perception, and also thinking about how much change people are willing to make to their lifestyle in order to adopt new technologies. Some of the other topics that we hit that I thought were interesting was we talked a little bit about methane as a specific C1 feedstocks, which was interesting. We had somebody from the University of Texas who was working in methane, and so we had a little conversation around thinking about different companies that are working in that space. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting was this thing that Shara was talking about just now, which is that researchers don't necessarily have the knowledge to build a business plan at the same time they're building the technology. And so how is it that we can incorporate that kind of information, that kind of knowledge early on into the research process so that we're building a technology that's economically viable? One of the things we do at the Wyss is we have collaborations with venture capital groups who come in and help foster our projects down our pipeline. And so by the time they're exiting, not only are they, they've really been sort of pressure tested, not only from a technical standpoint, but also from a market standpoint. And from a business plan standpoint. So I think those were some of the things that we talked about. If anyone who's in our groups, if you want to pipe in with anything else that I forgot, please do.
Great, thanks for sharing. And then Jay will tell us the solution to everything.
So
That's a good way
the thing that happened in my rooms is what happens to me a lot when I get together with people who are interested in this space, is that almost like no matter what you try to start a conversation about, it turns into a kind of a brainstorming session where people are imagining different products, different things that you could do with biology, different problems that biology could solve. So like, what about biological hydrogen as a fuel source? Is there anything there? Could we use AI to engineer enzymes for laundry detergent? Maybe the next Birkin bag needs to be made out of vegan leather. I heard a new problem. So farmers in India, they have leftover biomass at the end of the season, and they burn it, causing air pollution. So can we give them something profitable to do with that biomass? Can we turn it into something valuable? And so like I don't know, like, you know, there's good ideas. They're not all going to be good ideas, but just the sort of like sheer volume of possibilities that are opened up whenever you get into a space like this, it gives me a lot of hope that you know, like some of these are going to hit, some of these are going to work, and they're going to make money, and they're going to make the world a better place. And every time one of these crazy ideas starts to hit, the field is going to get more momentum behind it, and is going to get a better track record for investors and policymakers. And so I do think that I have a lot of hope that we're at a kind of a catalytic moment where the creativity of people who build with biology is finally getting matched by the tools, and we can start to turn some of these ideas into real products.
So it's really interesting because hearing from all of you and sort of jumping in and out of some of the discussions as well, it seems like they're sort of distinct discussions in terms of sort of where the focus area was. But there's also sort of a through line. And I'm just wondering, and this is really for anyone to either chime in on, or we can change the subject, but I'm thinking about when we have these discussions about any sort of technology, but obviously for us, climate biotech, of how well we do or not do with integrating, starting with let's dream about technological solutions, and then let's work down the pipeline, and then let's come up with a business plan, and then let's do engagement. And it seems like too often those are sort of distinct points on the path and not all tied together. But maybe I'm reading that wrong. So I'm interested to sort of hear people's perspectives, if I'm making sense at all about what I'm talking about these sort of somewhat distinct but overlapping components of taking a technology and getting it into use to address the issues that need to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like as a scientist, I'm used to thinking of the very earliest stages of the process. And I heard a lot. I think most of us tend to focus on a particular stage, some people on the policy stage, some people on the technology stage. I think it's the entrepreneurs who are the closest to seeing the whole story. Because you kind of have to have a plan for the whole translational pipeline if you want to make an actual product work. And that's like we need more of that thinking.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think one of the things that's striking to me is that the sort of way that these technologies are going to get field tested is if they are small companies. We're not going to get these larger companies to necessarily shift, but it's a really interesting thing to support these small spin-off companies in developing these new technologies in the environment they're going to have to operate in.
So Morgan has posted a question in the chat about sort of access and equity, and curious if people have thoughts on that. Or another question that came up a lot was sort of intended and unintended consequences. So floor is open if people have thoughts.
And I know in the group that Garrett and I were in, there was someone that had like lots of ideas around. Maybe I can put you on the spot, Chris, but you were asking a lot of questions about that and have some thoughts about that if you want to chime in.
Oh, sorry. I think it's actually, my name is Vidya Murthy.
It was actually Chris Chinapu, but if you have thoughts, go for it.
Yeah. So one of the things that we discussed, and I was in Shara's group, and I was, it's a really neat idea, like her company's idea about, coming up with an alternative for palm oil which has numerous applications from cosmetics to food to fuel and all sorts of other areas. So I was asking if there were unintended consequences of this technology. Of course, I was looking from the lens of the actual application, of the product itself compared to palm oil. How does this perform? But Shara had a wider, kind of nuance to this, this question where this new technology could be a great alternative for palm oil, which is actually very harmful for the environment. It's predominantly grown in Indonesia, Southeast Asia, and it's when you after the palm oil is extracted, similar to India, it leaves a lot of biomass, which is the only way they get rid of it is by burning all of that, and that leads to a lot of just pollution, air pollution, and which actually sweeps across the entire Southeast Asia all the way to Singapore and other areas. So it is a known air pollutant. So coming up with this new technology, I think it's traction, it's adoption by those areas, and also educating at that level to all of the not the farmers, because they're the ones who are doing the hard labor, but the local small companies and holdings that get profit and revenue from the palm oil. So that was a kind of a discussion which is quite eye-opening on just the far-reaching advantages of this new technology. Yeah, I think also for something to really take hold, for something like this, I think the local the politicians and the government need to get involved in this also. So I think that that's also something to consider.
I was just going to add a point on the kind of unintended consequences piece around ensuring that students or researchers are equipped to be thinking about these topics. I'll put a link to an EBRC resource that we recently developed and published on this topic. But any of you that have done research as a career, or have a PhD or that, you'll know, like, the first semester of your research, you take a class on like responsible conduct of research, and really it's like, how do you not plagiarize? How do you how do you like not how are you an ethical scientist? But we really thought about, how do we incorporate things like bioethics and biosecurity and biosafety into the similar curriculum. So we developed a whole curriculum with a series of lesson plans and case studies on some of these topics, really to help early career students, and it can be adapted in other venues as well. But really thinking, that kind of first taste of like, how do I think about the broader potential hazards or potential risks of my work, and think about it early on as I'm developing my project, and that instead of kind of the aftermath that I think it is a lot of the times right now.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. I think we have an example. We've made somewhat of a mess with chemistry, and we are aware of, and one of the things that's interesting is that not until I went looking for it did I get any training in what was toxic, what was going to be I was building molecules, but I didn't necessarily have a clear sense on what effect they would have on the ecosystem. And I think we can learn from those mistakes, and we can incorporate that into our education early on.
All right, I think that's a good place to stop. I think we've covered a lot of ground. Before we set you all free, we just have a very quick exit survey that Morgan's going to pull up.
And so hopefully this is also helping to prime you for, like, our goal is, what would you take from this conversation and have another conversation, a next conversation about this topic. So this information that you're providing is valuable to us, but we really do want to kind of leave you with that sense of a little call to action of, like, who do you want to talk to about this next? And thank you to all of our speakers for your time with us today, and thanks for everyone for turning out. And it's such a wonderful mix when we can get folks that are really in the know on these topics and folks who are wanting and ready to learn more. Yeah, and also feedback on the questioning tool is welcome. That's a work in progress for us. So I will put a few more links back in the chat for everyone, but please reach out, let us know what you're thinking and how we can create resources that would help move these conversations forward in different ways. And then finally, please consider participating in the rest of Harvard Climate Action Week. And if you are a Harvard affiliate of any kind at any time, basically if you had a Harvard email ever, HACE, the Harvard Alumni for Climate and the Environment, is open to you and your near family members. So we really appreciate their support in making the event happen today. Yes, Paul, I wish I could bestow Harvard emails. There is something called CUSP. It's the Coalition on I don't know. There's a group of organizations that are getting together, alumni groups related to climate and environment across. I'll see if I can find that link quick to folks. Yeah. I posted the link to CUSP if folks are from other institutions. That's a way to get connected and yeah, these actions are also really important. So thank you all so much for your responses to the poll. I'm going to close it now. And we really appreciate your participation today and hope to see you again, hear from you, and hope that you are having a next conversation, like as we close this call, wherever you're going to next in your day, whatever time it is in the time zone you are. Hopefully you're having a next conversation about these topics as well as just climate in general.